You know, for decades, glioblastoma has been one of medicine's biggest and most formidable mysteries. It's an absolutely devastating diagnosis, and figuring out where it comes from has been just incredibly difficult. The big question has always been, is getting this cancer just a case of terrible biological luck, or is there a hidden genetic story that we've all been missing? Well, some recent research has started to pull back that curtain, and what they found could honestly change everything. So, to really get why this is such a critical question, you have to appreciate just how high the stakes are. Glioblastoma isn't just any cancer, it is the most common and, frankly, the most aggressive malignant brain tumor in adults. Even with everything we can throw at it surgery, radiation, chemotherapy the median survival is a stark 15 months. That reality is exactly what pushes researchers to hunt for any clue, any tiny crack in the armor that could lead to a breakthrough. And that brings us right to the heart of it. Was the medical community right all along to think of most glioblastomas as just sporadic, random events? Or could there be an inherited genetic piece of the puzzle hiding in plain sight? A recent study set out to answer this very question, and what they uncovered is a genuine game changer. Okay, so to solve this mystery, scientists basically had to become genetic detectives. They needed a way to systematically dig through the DNA of glioblastoma patients, looking for any inherited clues that might set someone up for this disease. And this is where modern technology gives them this incredibly powerful magnifying glass. So how'd they do it? Well, their method was really clever. They took two different samples from 92 patients. First, a blood sample, which basically holds your inherited genetic blueprint, the DNA you were born with, and second, a sample from the tumor itself. By sequencing the entire genome of both and then comparing them side by side, they could spot the differences that were inherited, exactly the clues they were hunting for. Now get this, the researchers weren't just looking at patients who had a long family history of cancer. This was what they call an unselected group. Basically, an average cross-section of glioblastoma patients. And that's what makes what they discovered next a truly massive breakthrough. 11%. Out of all the data, this one number just jumped off the page. Now, I know what you might be thinking, 11%, that doesn't sound like a huge number. But for a cancer that scientists have for the longest time considered almost entirely a random sporadic event, believe me, 11% is a massive signal. So what does this 11% actually mean? It means that more than 1 out of every 10 of these average glioblastoma patients had inherited a specific genetic mutation. It's called a pathogenic germline variant, or PGV. And these aren't just any old genetic quirks. These are specific known variants that are strongly linked to a much higher risk of developing cancer. This finding was a direct challenge to that old way of thinking. The researchers put it pretty plainly in their conclusion. 11% of this average, unselected group showed a known genetic predisposition. So this wasn't just a hypothesis anymore. It was a clear, data-driven fact. The next question, of course, was, okay, so what are these specific genes? The investigation really quickly zeroed in on a specific biological system. I want you to think of your DNA like a massive encyclopedia that your cells have to copy perfectly, letter for letter, every single time they divide. The mismatch repair system, or MMR, is basically the body's genetic spell checker. Its only job is to go through and fix any typos. But if you inherit a faulty MMR gene, that spell checker is broken, and suddenly errors start to pile up all over the place, which dramatically increases the risk that a cell could turn cancerous. And when they actually broke down which inherited variants they were finding, the results were just stunning. Almost 3/4 of the main culprits were genes involved in that critical mismatch repair system. I mean, sure, other well-known cancer genes like BRCA1 were in there, but the story was overwhelmingly about this faulty DNA spell checker. Okay, so our genetic detectives had a prime suspect, these inherited MMR gene variants. But, just finding a suspect at the crime scene isn't enough to get a conviction. They had to prove that this inherited fault was directly responsible for causing the tumor. They needed to find the smoking gun. To do that, they turned to a classic concept in cancer genetics called the two-hit hypothesis. Here's how it works. It's pretty simple. You inherit 2 copies of most of your genes, right? 1 from each parent. The first hit is when you inherit 1 faulty copy. Now, that alone doesn't cause cancer, but it makes you vulnerable. The second hit, and this is the smoking gun, is when the second healthy copy of that exact same gene gets a new mutation later in life, but only inside the tumor cells. Finding that second hit is the proof that connects the inherited gene directly to the crime. And that is exactly what they found. In a full 60% of the patients who were carrying these key inherited variants, the researchers identified that crucial second hit right there in the tumor's DNA. This confirmed it. For the majority of these patients, that inherited gene wasn't just a bystander, it was a direct cause of their glioblastoma. And just to put this all into perspective, the frequency of these specific MMR gene faults in the general population is less than 1%. It's pretty rare. But in this group of glioblastoma patients, it was over 7%. I mean, the contrast is just undeniable. There is a clear, powerful genetic link between these inherited variants and this deadly brain cancer. So this is not just a fascinating piece of science. This discovery has profound real-world implications for patients, for their families, and for how doctors are going to approach treating this terrible disease from now on. This changes the game on so many fronts. First, and most importantly, therapy. For someone diagnosed with glioblastoma, finding out their tumor has this faulty MMR spell checker could open the door to immunotherapy, a powerful treatment that fails for most patients, but could be a lifeline for them. It also forces us to completely rethink who should get genetic testing. If family history isn't a reliable guide, maybe we need a new standard. And finally, this knowledge empowers families with information that could literally save lives through counseling and screening. It fundamentally shifts our entire understanding. The researchers themselves really highlighted this paradigm shift, stating that family history on its own is an unreliable predictor. Just think about that. Many of the patients in this study who carry these high-risk genes would have never, ever been flagged for testing under the current guidelines. The evidence is screaming at us that we need to look deeper. And all of this leaves us with a huge, provocative final thought. If our traditional methods are missing a significant number of people with a hereditary cancer risk, not just for glioblastoma, but for other cancers too, is it time to consider a radical change? Should we be moving towards a future where universal genetic screening is just a standard part of medical care for everyone? This study suggests that might be a question we can no longer afford to ignore.